My brother Nick looked at our parents and said, "Mitch is just a woman, give the business to me." They agreed just like. That left me out completely. I was devastated, but then the attorney who'd been sitting quietly in the corner finally spoke. He smiled and said, "Actually, your grandfather left something especially for you to look on." Nick's face when he saw what it was, priceless. That smug grin of his disappeared in an instant. Our family business wasn't a huge corporation, but it was everything to us. My grandfather had founded a small manufacturing company in the 1950s, and though it wasn't a giant player in the industry, it had provided us with a comfortable life. After he retired, my father and uncle took the reins. The plan all along had been for the next generation, Nick and me, to eventually take over. I love that business from the time I was a kid. I'd spent summers learning every single detail, payroll, logistics, operations. By the time I was 25, I knew how to run the company. Nick, on the other hand, never took it as seriously. He assumed the business was his just by virtue of being the eldest son. He barely scraped by in college, getting a business degree he never used. While I worked 60-hour weeks, he would show up late, attend a few meetings, and then head off to play golf or hang out with his buddies. Still, I thought my parents would be fair. Boy, was I wrong. A few months before my grandfather passed away, my parents called Nick and me to a meeting. From the moment I walked in, something felt off. Nick was sitting there wearing that smug, self-satisfied grin of his. Then my dad said, "Mitch, we've decided that Nick will take over the company when we retire." I thought I misheard. "What about me?" I asked, feeling my heart sink. My mom patted my hand like I was a little girl and said, "Sweetheart, you'll still be involved. You'll support your brother." Support after everything I'd done. They wanted me to clean up Nick's mess while he ran the company into the ground. Nick just smiled smugly and said, "It's nothing personal, Mitch. It just makes sense. I'm the eldest son. You can handle the small details. You know the things women are good at." I looked at my dad, hoping he'd step in and correct him, but he just sat there silent. I turned to my mom, who simply smiled and said, "You'll still have a good salary, dear. It's not like we're leaving you out." That's when it hit me. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I gave, I would never be equal to Nick. In their eyes, I was just the daughter. So I made a decision. The next morning, I walked into my dad's office and quit. "You're overreacting," he said. I didn't respond. "I finally see things clearly," I told him, and then I left. A few months later, my grandfather passed away. It broke my heart. Unlike my parents, he'd always believed in me. After the funeral, we all gathered with an attorney to read the will. Nobody expected much. My parents assumed everything would just go to them. Considering my grandfather had sold off most of his assets, the attorney went over the usual things: donations, sentimental gifts, until he got to me too. "My granddaughter, I leave something I know she will appreciate." I didn't expect anything, but then the attorney pulled out another folder. "This is a separate trust. Your grandfather left you full ownership of the original workshop where he started the company." My dad sat up straight. "The land, the building, everything inside it, it's all yours." Nick burst out laughing. "Great, Mitch gets an old warehouse. Meanwhile, I'll run a real business." But the attorney wasn't finished. "There's one more thing." He pulled out another document along with the property. "Your grandfather also left you all of his original patents." Nick's smile evaporated. "You see, our grandfather had invented several key manufacturing processes that the company still used. He never sold the rights to them. He simply licensed them to the business. Now I was the owner of those patents. The family business couldn't operate without them." Nick turned to my dad. "Fix this," he demanded, but there was nothing they could do. My grandfather had planned everything down to the finest detail, and me, I was ready to make my move. I tilted my head looking at Nick. "So you need my patents to keep your company running?" Nick clenched his fists. "Fine, name your price." I smiled. "No, Nick, I don't want to sell them. I'm going to keep them." For the first time, Nick realized he wasn't in control anymore, and I was just getting started. In the months that followed, I watched helplessly as my father's company slowly disintegrated. My dad tried everything to save it, looking for new suppliers, cutting costs, negotiating deals, but nothing could replace the manufacturing processes covered by my patents. Customers started drifting away. Investors pulled out, and before long the first round of layoffs hit. Nick, always trying to put on a brave face, tried to conceal the damage, but mass layoffs are hard to hide. The company that had once been the pride of our family was now falling apart, and I wasn't finished yet. The final blow came 3 months before my patents were set to expire. I made my move. I reopened my grandfather's old workshop, took out a loan, hired a handful of the laid-off employees, and started my own company. I licensed my patents to my new business. Now, if my dad's customers wanted to keep using the same manufacturing processes, they'd have no choice but to come to me, and they did. By the time my patents were about to expire, my dad's company was barely keeping its head above water. Then the phone call came. It was Nick, and he was sounding desperate. Please, we'll pay whatever it takes, Mitch, whatever it takes, he pleaded. I let the silence stretch out between us. Not this time. I thought I had the upper hand. Now my company was thriving. My grandfather's legacy was secure, and Nick was finally paying the price for his arrogance, or so I thought. But a year later I got a call from one of my clients. You need to see this, he said, sending me a link. When I opened it, I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Therein, hit like on this video. Front of my eyes was Nick's new company, selling a product that looked strikingly similar to my patented processes. He honestly thought he could pull the wool over my eyes. I didn't waste any time. I hired a specialist to investigate, and sure enough, Nick had stolen my technology. One of my employees had been secretly working for him, passing over confidential designs and information. I was livid. Nick thought he could get away with it, but I wasn't about to let it slide. I filed a lawsuit for patent infringement, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage. Since my patents were still active, I had every right to sue. Nick tried to drag the case out, hoping to delay the inevitable, but the evidence against him was irrefutable. Emails, documents, and even the testimony of the employee who had turned on him. It was over for him. The judge ruled in my favor, and the consequences for Nick were severe. Not only were his stolen products pulled from the market, but he was ordered to pay millions in damages, and to top it off, he was banned from working in the industry for the next 10 years. His new business was destroyed before it even had a chance to take off. As for the employee who betrayed me, well, my mother said, let's make sure he learns from his mistakes. I looked at her and simply replied, no, he made his own choices. Then I turned and walked away. I owed him nothing. A few years down the road, I heard about Nick again. After his failed attempt at running a business, he turned to cryptocurrency and NFTs. Yes, it wasn't long before he scammed the wrong people, and this time they weren't as forgiving as I had been. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. We expanded, bringing in top talent and innovating in ways Nick could never have imagined. We secured exclusive contracts and built a rock-solid reputation. Best of all, I never had to deal with my family again. One day I received a call from a business partner of mine. I just met with a guy named Nick. He's saying he used to run a big company, and he's got some innovative ideas. He's looking for investors. My stomach dropped. What was he up to now? Nick was trying to launch a new company to compete with mine. He was attempting to deceive a new set of investors who didn't know his history. Worse still, he was lying about his past, claiming that I was the one who had stolen his company from him. I could have ignored it, let him dig his own grave, but this time I wasn't going to let him slide. I made a few calls, set up a meeting with my partner, and made it look like I was interested in investing in Nick's new venture. Nick fell for the trap. I wasn't going to let him get away with it again. This time I was going to put an end to it once and for all. Nick walked into the meeting, acting like he was someone important, his swagger oozing with the same arrogance that had ruined everything before. He had a stack of fake business plans complete with glossy presentations and a sob story about me being the villain who stole everything from him. Mr. John Gilbert, a potential investor, played along with his charade. He let Nick talk, nodding thoughtfully before setting the trap. I like what I'm hearing, Mr. Gilbert said, leaning back in his chair. With a calculating smile, but before I invest, I need proof. Nick's face fell. The panic was obvious. He didn't have anything, not a single piece of real evidence to back up his grand claim, so he did what he always did. He resorted to stealing from me again. He rushed through the production of a product that was a blatant copy of my patented design, thinking he could pull off the same stunt he had before, but this time my lawyers were ready. As soon as Nick launched his counterfeit prototype, we were on it. We didn't just go after him. We went after everyone involved, his investors, his suppliers, even the companies that were backing him up. All were hit with lawsuits. The news broke, and the media wasted no time in exposing him as the fraud he was. His investors pulled out immediately. His suppliers severed ties with him without a second thought. The spotlight of scandal was on Nick, and the world was watching. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse for him, I made a move. I bought out his office, forcing him out of the space he thought was his. He had nothing left. In a last-ditch effort, Nick sent me one final email begging for help. I stared at it for a while, the words so familiar, the desperation so real. I could have responded, could have felt some kind of sympathy, but I didn't. I deleted the email without a second thought. Nick never recovered from that. The last I heard, he was working as a waiter in a small rundown restaurant. That was the end of his story. My parents, of course, tried to blame me. They said, "You destroyed your own brother, Mitch." I just smiled and shook my head. "No," I said calmly, "he destroyed himself." And with that, I walked away for good. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. A few years later, I heard about Nick. Again, he tried to make another comeback, this time scamming people with cryptocurrency and NFTs, but this time he picked the wrong crowd. I thought maybe he'd learned his lesson, but some people just never do. Meanwhile, my business flourished. I expanded beyond what I'd ever imagined, bringing in talented people who shared my vision. I made my grandfather proud, honoring his legacy. In every move I made, the best part one, never had to deal with my family again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, like the video and subscribe to our channel. This is the Twist Vault, where justice always finds its way. See you next time.